This is Jayquan, and this is Foundation Lesson number 53, A Brief History of the Electro Era, Part 2. Now I want to get right into it and talk about some of the players and producers behind this music. Unfortunately, because of time constraints and so much music that I probably won't even be able to get to, I'll have to keep it brief and only talk about a few. But there are a few that I want to kind of spotlight on this particular section. Now, the first one is Reggie Griffin. Reggie Griffin, he's a little known cat who was behind some great music and a great time for music. So a little on his history, the first big band that I know of that he was with was a group called Manchild. Now, as far as I know, Manchild made only 2 full-length albums, and they were affiliated with United Artists Records and Shy Sound Records. And, they didn't really blow up as a band per se, but as of interest is the fact that one of Reggie Griffin's band mates was Kenneth Babyface Edmonds. This is way, back in the days before he was solo or any of that kind of stuff. Didn't even have the name Babyface yet. So you fast forward and Sugar Hill Records, you had Wood, Brass, and Steel as the backing band behind, those early rap records. You had Keith LeBlanc on drums, Doug Wimbish on bass, Duke Booty, aka Ed Fletcher, on percussion, Bernard Skip Alexander, just a strong band that was behind Sugar Hill Records. And as they moved into the drum machine era, they picked up Reggie Griffin. And this was right around the time of, right after The Message. Right around the time of The Message was when Keith LeBlanc kind of bowed out of the group and went over to Tommy Boy, and along with Doug Wimbish produced the Force MD's debut album. Also released some records under the name Beatmaster, mainly Lip Service, which was a big hit for Tommy Boy. Did a lot of stuff with that label. He was on the Masters of the Beats compilation album. And like I said, did a lot of work with Tommy Boy and just worked all around basically once he left Sugar Hill. So Reggie Griffin came in right around that time, and they called him Mr. Everything. That was his nickname because he played every instrument. He was much like Prince in the fact that he was a multi-instrumentalist who could go in the studio and just crank out an album with no assistance from any other musicians. So the name Reggie Griffin is nowhere near a household name. It should be a lot more known than it is. He was behind many hit records, and he was behind many records that were mimicked. The sound of his records, the electro records and the records that were not considered electro, but especially the electro records were mimicked by some pretty major groups, the sounds on those records.
Scorpio. Show no shame, shake it, baby. DJ Flash, and he came here to give you a blast, and we are the Furious Five, and we're rocking shots and all the way live. Show no shame, shake it, baby. Show no shame, don't be shy. Rocks the fest and Raheem in the lead strings and Cowboys, the real McCoy and Grandmaster cuts much faster and is rough doing a job and Jigsaw is giving you more and Steve Jerome is the king on the throne. Nina in the place to be in. Keep Creole is how it goes, so my name of this jam is Scorpio.
Survival. Only the strong can survive. It's called survival. Only the strong can survive. It's called survival. In order to stay alive, it's called survival. Survival, survival, survival. They smile in your face and they talk behind your back. And when you get the story, it's never exact. Some say they're your friends, but they really are not, because they're only out to try and get what you've got. Survival. Only the strong can survive. It's called survival. Only the strong can survive. It's called survival. In order to stay alive, it's called survival. Survival, survival, survival. In jail they got a game and they call it survival. They run it down.
Okay, a couple things with Survival, Message 2, and Scorpio. Unmistakable drum programming and manipulation of sound effects and synthesizers on that record. Again, I respect musicians who have range, and this is a cat who, again, plays everything, but still can adjust his ear to say, okay, this electro sound is a stripped down sound with drum machines, and just adapt right to it and make something that dope. Now, in talking to Grandmaster Melly Mel, he told me that the motivation, or more the inspiration from Scorpio, came from the desire to top Planet Rock. You know, again, Planet Rock dropped in '82, and there was a need or a desire from the label and from the group to do something to knock Planet Rock off, because Planet Rock was on for so long. You know, it rocked from '82 quite a while. You know, it rocked a good while after its release. So the Message dropped in '82 as well, and then the Message album, which contained the song Scorpio, dropped in that same year of '82. So the motivation for Scorpio was, we gotta get something to compete with Planet Rock. Now, Scorpio did not affect Planet Rock in a negative way as far as impact. It did not do anything to slow down or stop the impact and legacy of Planet Rock. Planet Rock is Planet Rock. But Scorpio is amongst the greatest of the electro recordings, especially to come from a group that didn't specialize in that, and a producer who did some of everything. That says a lot for Reggie and his whole thing. And a similarity between, like, if you go back and listen to Planet Rock and, as we covered in the first part, the Planet Patrol record, Play at Your Own Risk, they were all that recording of Play at Your Own Risk, which came a little after Planet Rock. They all came from the same 2-inch tape, the same master, just added some instruments. You know, John Robie with his excellent keyboard and synthesizer work on that record. So it is with Scorpio and Survival. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily it was the same master tape, but the beat is the same beat and the sound effects are the same sound effects. If you listen, I wish there was an instrumental for Scorpio, but if you listen to the instrumental for Survival, Message 2, you almost got the instrumental for Scorpio. It's the same beat and it's the same track, essentially. And all produced by the great, again, Reggie Griffin. And again, this is why I do what I do, because Scorpio is a loved song. If you go on YouTube and look at Scorpio and look at the comments, you even see young people saying, "Oh, I was brought here by, Grand Theft Auto, whatever, because it's been on plenty of video games." So whole generations, not just one, but whole generations after our generation have discovered Scorpio, and they love this electro music. The young people really love this up-tempo 80s, it's 80s music, but it's still futuristic sounding, and they love it. And they credit it to Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, rightfully so, because they are the artists that performed it. But the producer, the one who played everything you heard on that song, is Reggie Griffin. And it just, the way music goes, the music business goes, usually you don't know the producer. These days, the producer is a lot more of a star than he was 30, 40, 50 years ago. The producer's name was rarely brought up unless you were on the level of a Quincy Jones, a super producer slash, band leader slash, director slash record label owner. Which brings me to the fact that at a point, okay, Reggie made a solo album on Sugar Hill called Mr. Everything. And it didn't really do much, and it wasn't directly on Sugar Hill. It was on Sweet Mountain Records, which was a division of Sugar Hill, one of the many divisions of how Sylvia would do with her record labels. But after Reggie left Sugar Hill, he went on to Quest Records and made a solo album, which was Quest was Quincy Jones' record label. So that just shows that talent recognizes talent. You know, for somebody on the level of Quincy Jones to peep out what Reggie was doing and actually sign him to his label, that's a big deal. But going back a little bit, Reggie did have solo success at Sugar Hill. It wasn't with the Mr. Everything album, but again, on Sweet Mountain Records, Reggie released a song called Murder Rock, and it's a classic Electro record. And his name is more known for that record probably than any other that he's done, even his very unknown history with Manchild.
I am a computer. I have been programmed to dance. I am here to digitize you. Dance.
The next player that I like to discuss in this is John Robie. John Robie, again, I mentioned him a couple times earlier, but he's another name that is well known, but still is not as well known as it should be. He is the one who contributed synthesizers and beat programming to, I call this trilogy of records like the best 3 in a row release for a rap artist, definitely throughout the 80s decade. Really, in the history of this genre, I would say this is probably one of the best 3 in a row 12-inch single releases. Now, we're going back to the days when, you know, rap groups didn't really release albums so much yet. It was, you know, a single, you know, then next year a single. To me, the best 3 in a row release of singles was Planet Rock, Looking for the Perfect Beat, and Renegades of Funk. Those 3 are 3 perfect records. The drum programming, the synthesizer work, the bonus beats, the rhymes, the harmonizing. Soul Sonic Force really had a different style. I remember when my son was a lot younger, probably 7 or 8 years old, he was listening to some music with me, and he was listening to Planet Rock, and he said, they're not really rapping, Dad. And I never thought about it. Of all the years that I've heard Planet Rock hundreds of times, they aren't really rapping. Like I said on the first lesson, or first part of this lesson, they're doing a hybrid of harmonizing and rapping. And they did the same thing on Looking for the Perfect Beat, and then they did the same thing again on Renegades of Funk. And it's not that they couldn't go straight rhyming, because you heard Globe on Play That Beat, rhyming straight. You would hear tapes from Zulu Nation anniversaries and different Soul Sonic Force things where they can rhyme without doing that style. But on those 3 records, they did this style that was like I said, a hybrid of rapping and their own special brand of harmonizing. But as well, the production, the beats, and again the synthesizer work and musicianship on those records is excellent. And that was care of, or by way of, John Robie, definitely. And of course with the assistance of Arthur Baker. And for a while, Arthur Baker and John Robie worked together and did some classic records, even doing records that, again, this electro music gave birth to what they call freestyle later, and Latin freestyle and things like that. You go back and listen to records like IOU by Freeze. That was John Robie and Arthur Baker on those records. Those records, again, if you classify them as freestyle, I'm not much for labels. I mean, we got to have labels to keep everything organized. But I'm not a real stickler for, you got to put this label on it. But something like IOU is not a electro record, but it's definitely in the family. You could tell it comes from the same place that the electro music came from. And again, that's Arthur Baker and John Robie. And John Robie would record with Arthur Baker. Then he just created his own groups, under different aliases and names. And one of the groups he created was called Nairobi, and they remade a song by Manu Dibango called Soul Makusa, and it was a hit record, not just by the standards of what an electro record was as a hit. It was a charted hit that got major daytime radio play on FM radio, which was a big deal at the time.
Keep it open, I'll get the job done right. On your body, mechanic, got you.
my love and you gave me my pride.
Drinking and fighting, they were my claims to fame. Your love's the only thing that's ever been maintained.
Girl, you played at your own risk, now I played at mine.
I've taken too many chances, my life's on the line.
Chain thrills mean nothing if you have a broken heart.
Again, I really wish that I could spend more time spotlighting more producers. I'm pretty sure I'll revisit. I'm pretty sure a part 3 will be in order. It's just so much music, so much influence of the music, so many more things to be said. But I just wanted to get a good basis down for this music and what it represented. So I'm pretty sure I'll be revisiting a lot of these artists because they deserve it. I mean, a cat like Hashim, I'd love to get more into the inner workings of, how he produced and created Pretty Tony in Miami again, producer of many freestyle records, producer of his own Electro records. I like to get into the 2 Live crew and their real genesis, which was not Dirty Records. They started off Electro and they started off in Cali and not Miami. They ended up representing Florida and representing that sound. But Electro again, I can't stress enough, it morphed into so many things. It morphed into bass music, which really was really big in Miami. People like DJ Magic Mike and all the great bass music that came out of Detroit and Miami. The way that this Electro music, like I said, it morphed into techno and morphed into house and morphed into club, and it's really a lot to be said. So at some point I'll come back and spotlight more artists because, I still haven't scratched the surface. It's just so much more music to do. But what I like to do right now is touch on how this music was mimicked by the mainstream. Anything that makes money. It's funny how, these young people from the streets made this music, and I'm talking about rap music at this point, that was not accepted. It was the stepchild of the music industry. And as soon as people saw it was something viable that could sell, the same people who disliked it jumped on it and wanted to do collaborations with rap artists, and the labels wanted to sign rap artists. And now look, but as it was with rap music, it was with Electro, the major groups started to mimic the sound and get the same producers because the music was making noise. It was making noise, but most importantly, it was making money. Now, I spoke about how the great Reggie Griffin did a really trademark thing, the way that he manipulated those sounds and sound effects on Scorpio particularly and Survival. And Midnight Star had a string of records that mimicked, I never heard them say, hey, we were trying to sound like Scorpio and Survival. But if you listen to it, the influence, I doubt very seriously that they would doubt that or would deny that they were influenced by those records.
Freakazoids, robots, please report to the dance floor. Z-O-I-D-S Z-O-I-D-S Freakazoid Z-O-I-D-S Z-O-I-D-S. 'Cause I, baby.
please hang that phone up?
We're sorry. You must first dial a 1 when calling this number.
So as you can see from those Midnight Star records, it was a lot more polished than you know, the electro records that were coming from the streets. You know, this was major label, you know, you were on Solar Records, you know, rest in peace to Dick Griffey. So they weren't going to do what Soul Sonic Force and, you know, those caliber of groups were doing. They were doing a more sophisticated version, but it was funky. If you were there at the time, you remember, especially Freakazoid. You know, that was the one that got the dance floor packed. But again, we respected that the same we respected the rest of the electro that was available out there. It was good music. So I'm going to continue to show how the mainstream artists of the time mimicked the electro records that were becoming a powerful force. Those years of like 82 through 85 were definitely powerful years for this genre of music.
goes on.
Yes, indeed. So that's just like feel good music. Like that Orbit featuring Carol Hall, The Beat Goes On, which is actually, that's a remake, but it's, done in an electro style. That was 82. That was just, again, I can't stress enough. If you were there, you remember how special that music was. And again, much of the mainstream, more R&B stuff, the way they tried to do it, they watered it down, but it was still, recognizable to us. And the young people were the ones that were buying a record like that. The Beat Goes On. Again, another record that got daytime FM constant radio rotation and charted, at the time. And again, that's very important, not for acceptance from the mainstream or whatever you want to call it, but just the fact that music was powerful enough to come from where it came from and dominate the radio, the dance floors, the charts. It's a powerful statement as to the creativity of this music. Paul Hardcastle, he was more of a jazz artist. Played synthesizer. I wouldn't say straight jazz, but he played synthesizer. Did a lot of work with D-Train, and he jumped on the craze. Not only doing the song Rainforest, he did a whole album called Rainforest. It was on a couple different labels. It was on Chrysalis at one point. Profile put it out. Profile put out the 12-inch of Rainforest, and it had a song called Sound Chaser on the B-side. That was just as funky as Rainforest. And in 1984, when this record dropped, I didn't even know what a Rainforest was, but I just knew it was a funky record, and we always would mix that with records like, Planet Rock and other records of the genre. And it was official. Rockin' Radio, if that sounds familiar, that's Tom Brown, the same Tom Brown who made Funky for Jamaica, Thighs High, and other hits. And if you go to foundationhiphop.com, under interviews, I have an interview with myself and Tom Brown, and he talks about Rockin' Radio, and the familiarity of it is because it was produced by the Johnson crew, who I mentioned earlier. And, it had that signature sound, like the early New Edition stuff. It had that same sound of Rockin' Radio. If you listen really close to Candy Girl and She Gives Me a Bang and all those more up-tempo records on the first album, the Candy Girl album, you'll notice the very signature Johnson crew, the melodies and the synthesizer work, and they put that same work on Tom Brown's Rockin' Radio when they produced him. Now, speaking of Candy Girl and New Edition's first album, I kind of feel like I'm shortchanging Arthur Baker. I mentioned his name a few times, but the impact of Arthur Baker, not only as a musician, a drum programmer, a producer, but also a record label owner. Again, this is the man who is partly behind Planet Rock. This is the man who's behind Rockers Revenge, the group Rockers Revenge. If you go back and you can search for Rockers Revenge, The Harder They Come, and some other hits that they did. Also, again, co-producing the Planet Patrol records, co-producing Renegades of Funk, co-producing Looking for the Perfect Beat, the legendary Beat Street soundtrack, and Breaker's Revenge. The iconic backdrop to the iconic battle scene in Beat Street, Arthur Baker production. But as well, his record labels, Streetwise Records, the label that New Edition originally was released, their record was released on. Candy Girl album was released on Streetwise. Party Time Streetwise was also the first Def Jam production, which was It's Yours. Go back and check out Marley Marl and Dimples D, Sucker DJs. That was on Party Time Records. That's Arthur Baker. It'll be well worth it for hip-hop lovers, lovers of dance music, and lovers of music in general to purchase a book by an author named Ben Merlis. Ben Merlis wrote a book called The Story of the Juice Crew and Cold Chillin' Records. And he goes all the way back to Mr. Magic and Marley on the Radio. And he goes all the way back to the beginnings of the Juice Crew, all the way back to Dimples D and Sucker DJs. I spoke about that on my Marley Marl lesson, The Genius of Marley Marl. He goes all the way back and he talks to the players involved, and he talks to Arthur Baker about his beginnings with Marley, or Marley's beginnings with him. So again, when I talk about how time was moving so fast and how all these things meshed into each other, 82, we got Planet Rock. 2 years later, we got It's Yours, a groundbreaking record, the beginnings of Def Jam. That music is almost like two different worlds. Within 2 years, the music had morphed that much, but a person who was partly responsible for both records, is one man, Arthur Baker. So I did not want to shortchange him in his credit for the music that he did. And again, when I talk about freestyle music, again, if you go back, you listen to IOU by Freeze and Pop Goes My Love and all those records that became what they call freestyle. Arthur Baker on Arthur Baker's Streetwise label. Go back and listen to the Ultimate 3 MCs. What are we gonna do about it? That's a Streetwise production. Party Time, Arthur Baker. Awesome Foursome, another production of his. I mean, the list goes on. Even when Scorpio from Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5 went solo and did his Go Michael Air Jordan record, that was on Arthur Baker label. He did it with Jazzy J, and it was on Criminal Records, which again, that was Arthur. So props to Arthur Baker for various songs and various business moves that moved the music forward. Definitely. Now in 1982, Jive Records. Jive was a label that out of the UK, a subsidiary with Arista Records. But Houdini was early on Jive Records, and we know of Jive, in the rap field because KRS-One and E40, Too Short, the list goes on and on. But in rap, the first really rap that Jive or Jive Zamba put out was the Houdini Records. But they had an album called Jive Rhythm Tracks in that first part of the 80s. In 82, they put out these were compilation albums with instrumentals where sometimes it would be like just an instrumental of an already existing record. Like on one of the Jive Rhythm Tracks, they did an instrumental of The Message. It wasn't a really good copy of it, but they just, for some reason felt the need to recreate The Message. And these were compilation albums, all instrumental. And many times the name of the song was actually how many beats per minute the song was. So if a song was 107 beats per minute, that was the speed of it. The title was 107 beats per minute. So in 1982, they put out a compilation, and one of the songs was called 122 beats per minute, and it became an iconic piece of electro. Again, it's just an instrumental, but DJs began to mix with it, began to cut with it. Cash Money did a lot with it. Jazzy Jeff did a lot with it. If you go back and listen to some of Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince's early recordings, they actually have a song, I believe it's called Jive Rhythm Tracks House Party Style, something like that. Whatever the title is, it talks about Jive Rhythm Tracks, and Jeff is actually cutting up 122 beats per minute. Again, it's an iconic piece of electro, almost by accident. I won't say by accident, but it just was a compilation. Jive Rhythm Tracks, all the collectors and DJs had them. And most of the time, like I said, the songs weren't necessarily great. It's just, experimental stuff that Jive, released. But 122 beats per minute was by far more excellent than anything on any of those compilations. And again, I keep saying those years of 82, 83, 84 were just on fire for this music. And I talked about Reggie Griffin and Scorpio and the way he manipulated that noise. It was also done on this song in the same year that he did Survival, Message 2, and Scorpio. So I don't know if they are mimicking Scorpio on this particular cut, or if perhaps Reggie Griffin heard Jive Rhythm Tracks and he mimicked it. Or maybe it's just a coincidence that they both did a very similar track, but there are similarities between the tracks. At this point, I'd like to speak about the influence of electro on to-go-go music, Trouble Funk particularly, because I'm very, very familiar with the history of go-go, being only 2 hours away from DC and a part of that scene. It's always been a big thing in Virginia. If you listen to the early Trouble Funk records, like the live version of Drop the Bomb, they actually call out Richmond, which is my hometown. And, you know, we just always been connected very, very closely to the go-go scene. And I can't remember in the history of this music any other groups that would have been visionary enough to incorporate electro into their go-go. And at that time, really, you know, Trouble Funk were the ambassadors. I mean, Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers were making records during the electro era. And you had a couple of groups, but they're a lot more regional. Nobody at that time was as national as Trouble Funk, you know, recording for Sugar Hill Records, recording for several of their own labels, and recording for Island Records. That was a really big deal. And 3 different times, Trouble Funk has experimented with electro. The first time was on Trouble Funk Express, which was a go-go remake of Trans Europe Express, and it was an excellent one at that. Trouble Funk had a song called Arcade Funk, so it really was 4 times. Arcade Funk is just a magical song, especially again if you were young during that time of arcade culture being so prevalent in the early 80s. They did a song and you would think that they went in the arcade and just recorded the sounds from the arcade and put them on the record, but they didn't. What they actually did was they went in the arcade, recorded the sounds, and went back and found the keyboards and the original sounds, and they recreated these sounds. But you would think they were playing Pac-Man and different games within Arcade Funk. Arcade Funk is not an electro song. It's done in the spirit of electro, and it's accepted as electro. Then they did a follow-up to Arcade Funk called Search and Destroy. Search and Destroy was purposely done. Big Tony, the leader, founder of Trouble Funk, told me that the purpose of them doing Search and Destroy, in addition to being a part 2, so to speak, of Arcade Funk, they were actively and very purposely trying to, I won't say compete, but make an answer to the electro records and tap into that vein that was very popular with young people. So they made Search and Destroy, which was sonically a lot like Arcade Funk, just a lot faster, and that's where the electro similarity comes into play. And lastly, they did a song called Spend Time. Now, Spend Time is a little less electro than the other 3 that I just mentioned, but it's still very much in that vein of electro. So like I said, no other group in the history of go-go tampered with or experimented with electro. So again, kudos to Trouble Funk. And if you go to foundationhiphop.com, go to interviews and go to Trouble Funk, I have a very extensive interview with Big Tony of Trouble Funk. And if you also search my foundation lessons on YouTube, I have an extensive lesson that's pretty educational on Trouble Funk.
the greatest arcade funk machine.
People live in the streets. You got to be careful of everyone you meet. There's looting and shooting, people stabbing and grabbing. The innocent bystander, the police are grabbing. Ain't it a pity, cause you hate the city, but the way you feel ain't no big deal. You got to survive, and that's the real nitty-gritty. You go uptown, downtown, you got to turn your life around.
Electric Kingdom.
Drop to
Electric Kingdom.
come to
Electric Kingdom.
drop to
Electric Kingdom.
You say things ain't right, it's cold as ice. But how'd you like to spend a Siberian night? He said, could it be the KGB? Or is it just my reality? So you believe everything you see, cause you're watching the world on a color TV. You got nuclear war, atomic rain, and nuclear winter gonna freeze your brain. Siberian Nights. Siberian Nights.
Yeah, this is really feel-good music. Like I said, for people, cats is my age that can remember back to this music. Twilight 22, interesting group. Not a lot is really known about them. I remember reading long ago, way back when this music was out. This was like 83 when the Electric Kingdom was out. One of the cats in that group like used to play with Stevie Wonder. So like a lot of these groups, these were musicians. They didn't necessarily come from the hip hop world, but because on the strength of Planet Rock in the States, so many people wanted to capture this sound. And like I said, you're seeing from the last few things I played on a row, you're seeing a theme or hearing a theme. You know, like I said, Electric Kingdom, Planet Rock, these different, like I said in the intro, these different like otherworldly places that have like this kind of space and time travel type theme to them. And then sonically they sound the same. Like you could mix Planet Rock and Electric Kingdom seamlessly because it's the same drum pattern, you know, and the songs are even formatted the same. You know, the vocoder on Planet Rock saying, you know, Planet Rock, this one is saying come to Electric Kingdom. But you still never got the feeling that all this sounds the same and is boring. As many similarities as there were within the music and the format of the songs and the subject matter, each one still stood in its own, you know, in its own blueprint. And it was an exciting time. This was pre-crack era, you know, and like I said, we're teetering on, you know, a lot of this is rap and connected to rap, but all of it's not, but it's still under that umbrella. And even the rap elements of it, rap hadn't gotten hard yet. Like I said, this was before crack cocaine, and that's a very relevant thing that people don't talk about, you know, as far as this music goes. And my book that I'm working on, The Evolution and De-Evolution of Rap Music, I speak heavily on, and in fact, that's the backdrop for my book, the subject matter of the music, and what was allowed to be said, and the attitude of the music, and how it made you feel before crack hit, and changed the whole dynamics of the game. But however, getting back to the two selections I just played, the other song by Twilight 22 was Siberian Nights, that dropped not too long after Electric Kingdom. It was the follow-up. And again, it sounded so much like Electric Kingdom, which was the attraction to it, but still there were subtle differences. But both dope songs. Electric Kingdom was one again who it got daytime airplay, and it hit the black charts, which a lot of these songs did not. A few of them did, but most did not. Siberian Nights felt a little more message heavy than Electric Kingdom. Electric Kingdom definitely had a message to it, but Siberian Nights felt a little more serious, a little less like the fantasy world. Like I said, the rest of these songs kind of felt like you were talking about a futuristic fantasy world. Siberian Nights felt a little more preachy, might not be the best word, but it was a little more heavy-handed in the messaging behind it. Record label wise, it was on Vanguard Records. One thing about Vanguard, like 4 years later, after these records, Spectrum City will make their debut on Vanguard. And Spectrum City is the group that became Public Enemy. I mean, you had Chuck D and my man Butch Cassidy as Spectrum City on that record. And, again, just 4 years after, this music comes out, just to show you how fast everything was going. This electro music, which some people call techno music, kind of interchangeable names. But yeah, this is feel good music. It feels good to go back and hear this music. It's kind of timeless as far as I'm concerned.
Now show everybody just where is
Yeah, so just listening to the words and the instructions on this song, this is only a year after Planet Rock. This is Fix It in the Mix, Pretty Tony. This is out of Miami. And, you know, he had his own empire he was running from out of Miami with, you know, his own group called Freestyle. Then he had Trenier, who was like an R&B freestyle type artist. Then he had Debbie Deb that made When I Hear Music and Lookout Weekend. He's producing a lot of music out of Miami. That's Pretty Tony. If you listen to the instruction he's given on this song, again, just a year after Planet Rock, he's telling people, you know, let me see you moonwalk, you know, break dance, you know, spin on your back and all of this. So that's right around the timeline that I was saying in the intro that this, or in the beginning, that this music, Planet Rock and that era right after Planet Rock, for the rest of the country, not New York, for the rest of the country, this was our soundtrack to what I call that second kind of uprising of breakdancing. Fix It in the Mix was a pivotal record, more underground at the time that it came out, but I mean, just the little things, the little nuances, like the glass breaking in the background. That was something different. It was just randomly you just hear glass break, and they had the breathing in the background. You know, a lot of these records had breathing and different, you know, random noises like that, but the way that it was rhythmically done on this record just set it apart from a lot of others. You know, that vocoder that we all loved. Again, this was the time of, you know, early 80s coming out of the 70s and all the sci-fi stuff that was going on. Like I said, Star Wars and everything else, you know, anything robotic back then was cool to us. You know, we still, arcade culture is booming in that time, you know, so this was right in line with all that. Before that was Egypt, and that was from an EP that had Egypt, My Beat Goes Boom, What Is a DJ If He Can't Scratch, and The Ultimate Scratch. Now, that record, you know, the day that I bought it, I had never heard it before, and I never knew that it would be this monumental record, you know, within the electro or techno or whatever you want to call it world. I was just in this department store I used to cop records from, and I was in there one day and I asked my mom, hey, can you buy me this record? I'd never heard the record before. Like, Mom, you gotta buy me this. And it was just on the strength of the titles of the songs, particularly What Is a DJ If He Can't Scratch and The Ultimate Scratch. Anything that had the word scratching in it, I was gonna buy it. I didn't need to hear it. And this is the store that I bought this from, is the same store that I bought Is Yours from, and I bought it in the same exact manner for the same reason. I saw the curve arm turntable on the front, and I read the back, and it said special thanks to Jazzy J. And there was a version called the Death Party Scratch Mix, and I said I gotta have it. And both of those records, Egypt and Is Yours, pivotal records within this music culture. And I just got them on a whim of just being in the store, saying, looking at the covers and, hey Mom, can I have this? And then taking it back home, putting it on, and just having my mind blown. So Egypt, again, it falls in that kind of fantasy type of song, you know, about this distant place. You know, even though Egypt is a real place, the way he's talking about it is the same way they're talking about Come to Electric Kingdom and Planet Rock and those kind of songs about these mystical places. And one thing that these songs had in common was they always had this kind of this synthesizer line. You know, as I think back to Electric Kingdom, when you hear that synthesizer line, you know, you can almost see the man, you know, playing a little horn and a snake coming out of the little basket. You know, they had this kind of otherworldly little rhythm to them. And Egypt, the same thing. You know, it had elements of Planet Rock, elements of songs like Electric Kingdom, and, you know, again, the vocoder, that drum pattern, that up tempo. Like I said, these songs, they were never boring to us. It never felt like they all sounded the same, even though many of the elements of these songs were the same. And I would not know back then that Egyptian Lover was part of Uncle Jam's army, and Uncle Jam's army was throwing these big, you know, these big events and these big parties at arenas and having, Run DMC opened for them. If you go back and check my lesson, I think it's called The History or Brief History of Los Angeles Rap Records, something like that. If you go back to that, I talk about Uncle Jam's Army, the Egyptian Lovers' position in Uncle Jam's Army. All this, the seeds of NWA are all in this music, because as Uncle Jam was making these records, the World Class Wrecking Crew, who was basically a very early incarnation of NWA, they're making records right alongside him. And we haven't even scratched the surface yet. There's so many songs, so many records, so many sub-genres under techno. Like I said, there are records who don't fit this category of having the up-tempo and the vocoder, but they're still electro records. And like I said, when you hear them, you know them. A lot of them were on Tommy Boy. A lot of them were on smaller independent labels. But there's just so much music in, like I said, such a small amount of time. And those 5 years that I'm really concentrating on from let's say 79 or 80 through 85 or so, you see 83 and 84 was when a bulk of these records came out, and they were groundbreaking records, and it was records that the DJs really used to love to manipulate and scratch and backspin, and those tapes we had with those electro songs on them, that's a magical time. I can't say it enough. And at some point, once I do a little more interviewing and talking to people who were in the proximity of cats like the Latin Rascals and the edits and everything that went into mixing and editing these records, it's not just the artist going in and making these songs. There was a lot, behind the editing. Like I said, the Latin Rascals, Herb Powers, who was mastering these records. Sonically, there was a lot going on. There was a team of people who made these records what they were.
About the boogie down Bronx, it's a one of a kind. It's the place to be, it's a state of mind. About the guys out here, they really are cooking. They snatch gold chains when the cops ain't looking. But Brooklyn, I say, is the place to be. It's where I stay in reality. So listen close and you all will hear about the devastating body rocker of the year. One young man born to be an MC, the only one to watch it with the guarantee. Because I dress to impress, guaranteed to be a hit. I walk down the street, the girls are jumping on it. I got the ladies on my left, freaks on my right. The ladies follow me all through the night. Cause I'm the one with the action, the king of satisfaction. You listen to my rhythm, there is a chain reaction. Goes up your back and comes down your spine. And when it hits your head, it's gonna blow your mind. And if you're from the Bronx and you hear the sound, come on everybody, boogie down, boogie down.
Oh no, it's Cosmo!
So yeah, Boogie Down Bronx, an anthem of sorts, you know, long before we even knew who KRS-One was. Boogie Down Bronx, Man Parrish, Freeze Force, Cool John Ski. You know, I played a song earlier, Hip Hop Bebop. Again, another instrumental breaking song from that time period by Man Parrish. Man Parrish was a cat who was just making different kind of dance music. You know, got himself an 808, and you know, on my Mantronic lesson, I think the first one, I talked about that cowbell and how I love that sound. That was a sound you hear common in a lot of these recordings. But I think I was talking about Fresh is the Word, and I was saying the difference was the way it was used volume wise. You know, they had it so loud in the mix on Fresh is the Word that it just played a part in that song, and it just made it did so much for the character of the song sonically because it was so loud in the mix. But you know, you could tell a lot of these guys are using, you know, 808s, 909s, same kind of equipment, same kind of drum machines. Man Parrish was very proficient on the drum machine and on the synths, the synthesizers. Again, incredible record, Hip Hop Bebop. You know, incredible energy in that record. And then, like I said, this one, you know, he also did stuff with Two Sisters, and you know, he did some more productions. But this one, Boogie Down Bronx, was just, that was it, man. Like I said, the keyboard work, the synthesizer lines, the drum programming. You know, some back and forth, a couple jabs back then. You know, when John Ski says, "You got the perfect beat," I hear you say. I remember hearing Man Parrish tell a story about, I don't know if they were recording at the same studio or what, but there was something about looking for the perfect beat, and Arthur Baker and his team of people looking for the perfect beat being the second release by Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force. And there was some kind of not beef, but that line was a dig at those guys with the perfect beat. There's some very prolific work coming out, you know, during those pivotal years of this music. And then of course, a Nucleus, very different their approach to electro. You know, Jam On Productions, you know, was the backbone of Nucleus. Jam On Productions was a mobile DJ unit from Brooklyn. And I have an extensive interview with my man Cosmo D that will be coming out soon. I have an interview with John Robie as well. He doesn't talk to a lot of people, so I'm honored that he gave me like the whole story, what you know, everything with Planet Rock and Perfect Beat and Renegades of Funk and things like that. But as far as Cosmo D, their approach to electro, techno, whatever you want to call it, it was a little different. If you like the opening of Wiki, when I first heard that song, the thing that really grabbed me was that live bass line. You know, most of these songs don't have a real bass in it. You know, when I heard the bass plucking, it immediately pulled me in. And the drum programming, all of it, very, very in the vein of what everybody's doing, but at the same time, very different, if that's possible. And I didn't know how to take Nucleus because they were doing like a lot of parody stuff. Like, you know, at the end, they were kind of, you know, taking a little dig at Sugar Hill Gang and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. So the song was as funky as it was. It felt like a parody. So, you know, I didn't quite know how to take them originally. You know, kind of thought they were going to be like just a one-hit one. There were so many records like this back then. You know, somebody had a drum machine, some vocal, and they just threw a record out. You never heard from them again. And I kind of thought Nucleus would be one of those groups. And, of course, you know, we saw that they weren't with Jam On It and, you know, Computer Age. And they did like 3 albums, I believe it was. Computer Age, incredible record. Very prophetic. I've talked a lot about that in different lessons, how there were a couple records back in the 80s that really foretold this time that we're living in now and how computerized it would be. And Computer Age was definitely one of them. Funky, again, dope synthesizer, dope drum machine programming. And like I said, Nucleus is a band. You know, it's not just a few guys, you know, with some drum machines and keyboards, you know, calling themselves a band. They were a full band. Rest in peace to Chili B. But definitely Nucleus, to me, they don't get the deserved props for their contributions, and there will definitely be at least a part 2, probably a part 3, and we'll get into more Nucleus music in those parts. The Johnson Crew, talented group of young men out of Boston, Massachusetts, who ran their own label called Boston International, which was patterned like Philly International. If you look at their logo, you know, the Philly International had, you know, the big P for the logo, and a dope logo. And Boston International had the big B in the same way. And, you know, they definitely patterned it after Philly International. And, you know, they're making their own records. They were brothers, Maurice Starr and Michael Johnson, or they pronounce it John Zun with a Z to give it that kind of futuristic feel. If you go to foundationhiphop.com, I have an interview with Michael Johnson, very extensive. He's another one that just doesn't talk to a lot of people. And again, I was in a put in a very good position to be able to talk to that brother for a couple hours and actually get the answers to questions that I had since I was like, 12, 13 years old. So that was an honor. But a very good interview. Get a chance to go over and check that written interview out. But yeah, Maurice Starr, the brother who actually discovered New Edition, put him in the studio, recorded them through Arthur Baker's Streetwise Records. A few of the records that I played today have been through Arthur Baker, again, one of the co-producers of Planet Rock, had a couple of his own labels, and put out Candy Girl and that whole first New Edition album. Mamari Starr was the one who actually discovered them and New Kids on the Block. In addition to him being an artist in his own right, who had major label releases out in the 70s under the name Maurice Starr, and then did Electro Records, after the Johnson Crew, or while the Johnson Crew was still going on. Electric Funky Drummer being, one of the big ones that he had. Also did some producing with his brother, notably Tom Brown, Rockin' Radio. But as the Johnson Crew doing their own thing, Pac Jam, they originally called it Pac-Man, and they had put it out on their own Boston International. Got the attention of Tom Silverman and Tommy Boy. They tweaked it, re-released it as Pac Jam. And monumental joint. Slower in tempo than a lot of electro records, but like I said, that's not a written rule that it has to be up tempo. I'm just saying most of the electro or techno records were a bit more up tempo, but Pac Jam was slowed down and heavy on the vocoder and funky. Space is the Place is another one. It doesn't fit into the mold of some of what I've played on this particular lesson, but the great thing about those records were like the B-side, which is supposed to be an instrumental, but it's not truly an instrumental. It's like a whole different version, and that was everything for DJs and those of us back then who were putting together mixes and manipulating these records to have two different versions of the same song. As I was talking about Maurice Starr and his brother Michael Johnson, they also were at Sugar Hill Records back in the days, and they did Showdown for Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5 versus the Sugar Hill Gang. That was Maurice Starr and Michael Johnson, those two brothers. As well, they did a song called Monster Jam by now this is the Monster Jam by Brother, not the Monster Jam that Spoonie G did with the Sequence on Sugar Hill Records. So they go back that far, and they go back, like I say, even further than that. Maurice Starr was making records on major labels back in the late 70s. But along with many of the other Tommy Boy artists, Tommy Boy had a lot of the electro and techno stuff on lock for a good while, and a lot of it, even though Tommy Boy was a independent label, some of the sophistication they had the sophistication sonically of a major. Like I said, if you listen to the Pac-Man song that was on Boston International, and you listen to Pac Jam on Tommy Boy, it's night and day. The one that they did on their own on Boston International sounds like a demo, and the one with Tommy Boy is mixed better, mastered better. The way they re-recorded it, everything about it was a lot better.